So let's talk about mechanisms of physiological functions control or regulation. We know that feedback uses in the mechanisms of the control, and now we need to understand what is this. So generally, mechanisms of control, or in some cases we will use this terminology, regulation of physiological functions, So generally, mechanisms looks like this. We have so-called control center. In our body, as we understand, it is brain, of course, brain center of the regulation, and endocrinic system, endocrinic organs with hormones. This control center contain values that we need to maintain using this information. Okay, by the own influences, control center influence to the activity of physiological functions, to the parameters of the physiological functions. Actually, control center send controlling signals to the organs, to the physiological systems that including into the performing of physiological functions, such as respiration, respiratory physiological function, digestion, etc. Okay, so and physiological functions work for the maintaining of the parameters of homeostasis. As we know, we need in most of the cases, aim of control is stabilization of the homeostatical parameters. And control center operate by the physiological functions can decrease activity or increase. Main purpose is stabilization of the homeostasis. And control center, of course, use feedback. Usually it is negative feedback. We know what is this. Okay. So, and how we can define this process? Process of the control. Definition of the physiological regulation. What is this? Physiological regulation is influence on physiological function influence to the physiological function in order to change its parameters, in order to change its parameters, in order to maintaining of homeostasis. In order maintaining homeostasis. Okay, so this is physiological regulation. So now we need to understand how it happens. What other mechanisms are present in our body for these regulatory processes. We know three main mechanisms of control or regulation. So there are three main. It is nervous, humoral, and myogenic. Nervous, humoral, and myogenic. What are the differences between them? Main difference in the agent of the regulation. Agent of the regulation means what information type uses for the transmission of the signal from control center to the effector. In nervous mechanism, uses electrical process on cellular membrane. We will call this like action potential. In humoral mechanisms, uses factors of the humoral regulation. Humoral factors. We call this humoral factors. Humoral factors. For example, this is substances like hormones. It is neurotransmitters, special substances that transmit information in chemical synapses, is between excitable cells for transmission of electrical information, electrical signals. In some cases, humoral factors are metabolites, such as carbon dioxide, lactic acid, etc. Regular peptides, growth factors, etc. Okay, all these regulator factors transmits through the body fluids. And the myogenic effect, myogenic regulation, we can call this like local mechanism. And it is regulation of the muscular contraction, even without external nervous and humoral signaling. It is own properties of the muscular tissue. For example, depending on the muscular contraction depends upon initial length before contraction. If we stretch muscular tissue, we can receive stronger response, stronger mechanical contraction after stimulation. Or rhythmical stimulation. The faster we stimulate muscle, the more strength of contraction, of following contraction we can receive. So, and nervous and humoral mechanisms are the systemic or central. Systemic or central mechanisms. So, what are the characteristics we can give to these mechanisms? Okay, so what are the characteristics or specifications? specifications of nervous and humoral. So we have several specifications, such as agent of regulation. We have difference in agent. Agent in nervous system is action potential. We know it is brief electrical process able to propagate down to the axon. From axon hillock and brain can send signals to our effectors through this electrical signal. In humoral mechanism, it is humoral factors. Next characteristic is substrate. Substrate of regulation. Substrate for nervous is nervous system. For the humoral mechanism, it is body fluid. Body fluids. Next characteristic is velocity. Velocity of the signaling. Nervous mechanism is a very fast mechanism, limited only by the velocity of the propagation of action potential. The faster action potential propagate down to the nerve, the faster mechanism. Humoral mechanism. Humoral mechanism is usually slow. Time between releasing of the signaling factor or molecular chemical signal to the internal fluid and achievement of the target cell and starting of the physiological response, usually this time prolonged. Next characteristic is duration. Duration of the effects. In nervous mechanism, it is short, of course, limited only by the action potential propagation. Action potential usually durated only limited with several milliseconds. After that, disappear. Action potential, it is just like trigger of the activity, activator of the function, and then very fast disappear. We receive brief response, and for maintaining of the low-on effect, we need to maintain high intensity of the high frequency of the electrical stimulation. In some cases, it works. For example, for the autonomic nervous system, when tonic activity of the nervous centers can maintain stable level of the secretion very long time, or contraction of the smooth muscles, for example. Okay, so, and the humoral mechanism, it is very long durated mechanism. Long durated mechanism. Before moment when we maintain high level of the concentration of the molecule in internal fluids, we will receive response of the target organ to this presence. Okay, and last one is address. Address. So address. Address in nervous mechanism is exact address. This address depends upon area of the innervation. Only innervated area will respond to the nervous signaling. If you want to contract some muscle of your body, it means that exact nervous fibers send electrical signal to your muscles for starting of the contraction. Okay, for the humoral mechanism, this general effect. General effect means that potentially active substance, when released to the internal fluid of the body, to the blood or tissue fluid, will act to the any cell of your body. Responsibility of response depends upon only presence of the specific receptors to this substance. Some tissues response, some tissues no response. Okay, but localization of these cells in the body may be different. Okay,